There are 4 rare Capcom games on the Game Boy Color, and I'm going to review them right now in this here video, starting right now. So anyone who has ever played a fighting game on the Game Boy or Game Gear knows that the quality of fighters on systems of such low power are usually horse poop. It was Mortal Kombat 4 on Game Boy Color that jaded me, and brought me to the realization that fighters on Game Boy were a death trap of disappointment. If only I had known that Street Fighter Alpha were on Nintendo's colorful portable machine, that perhaps could have changed everything. The game was ported over to the handheld by developer Crawfish Interactive. They worked exclusively in developing games and ports for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. They made games like Disney's Aladdin, the X vs. Sever games on Game Boy Advance, and Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the GBA. Amongst many others. If you feel so inclined to look up their list of games, do so. They're quality. You probably have a few and don't even know it. And if you haven't played Street Fighter Alpha 3 on GBA, it's mind-bogglingly good in terms of ports. As is the game I'm talking about now, Street Fighter Alpha for the Game Boy Color. To put it simply, it's Street Fighter Alpha. It feels like Street Fighter, it plays like Street Fighter. It's a port onto inferior hardware, but it plays very much like the original. The characters and moves are all there, including the super combos. That's what you call them, right? The super combos in this game? I don't know, I just throw fireballs. Now there are some compromises in the porting process, but these compromises don't hinder the gameplay. The graphics themselves are serviceable, each character looks like the character, and the moves look like the moves for the characters. The HUD and power bars take up a chunk of the screen, but are clear and visible. During the versus screen, you get an 8-bit rendering of each character's face. Several backgrounds from the original are here in the game, however, they resemble the static backgrounds you might find on Tiger Electronic games from the 90s. Some of these backgrounds have night variants, and very few have movement in the background. In one level, there is a guy cheering on the fight, in another is the cat, and in another one is a shop owner sweeping the doorway of their shop. 2 guys are throwing fireballs at each other in the street, and this shopkeeper is just sweeping and sweeping. This type of thing must happen all the time there. As far as sound design is concerned, there isn't much. You do get an 8-bit rendition of several songs from the other Street Fighter games, a badass song for the main menu, and a little musical sting for the versus screen. But that's it. Sound is dead everywhere else, including the credits screen, which you would expect to have some type of music, but it doesn't. Sound effects wise, the game is going to be tishes and shishes. There's just not much in the sound department. In the gameplay department, it's very much Street Fighter. It has the speed of Street Fighter and the moves of Street Fighter, which surprises the hell out of me. There are only 2 buttons on the hardware, one for punch and one for kick, and depending on where you're standing and which direction you're pushing on the directional pad, your character will do either a light, medium, or hard attack. All of the moves in the game are executed in the same way all the moves are executed in the other games. For this port, there is little compromise in the gameplay department. When you finish tournament mode, you receive a text ending giving you a little bit of story to conclude your journey. All the characters from Alpha are here. You can fight Akuma and M. Bison with a code. You can also play as Akuma, M. Bison, and Dan with a code. I think. I was never actually able to get it to work, no matter how many times I bashed the code into the controller. However, it is possible to select those characters on the random character selector thing. What the hell is that thing called, by the way, in fighting games that gives you the random selection thing? What is that called? Does anybody know? Comment below. I tried for about a half hour to get any one of these characters, and I did eventually get Dan from the random selector. He plays just like Dan. I wasn't able to get Akuma or M. Bison, but through the power of editing, I am able to show you that both Bam and Biggity Bam, those characters are available through the means of whatever this thing is called. The problem with this setup, in my opinion, is that once you get a game over as these characters, you will have to try getting them again with this thing to continue playing as them. It isn't easy. All in all, Street Fighter Alpha on the Game Boy Color is good. Darn good. Buy it if you can find it. The next game on our little list here is Ghosts and Goblins. Really, it's Ghosts and Goblins. I was shocked and surprised this game was on the Game Boy Color. It's another port this time, done by Digital Eclipse, who also did a bunch of games on handhelds. I don't know how I feel about this particular port of Ghosts and Goblins. It seems to be a port of the NES port. It looks the same and plays the same, but there are certainly some changes that were made. The first one you'll notice is the audio. The music just doesn't sound as good. It actually sounds like someone is trying to murder my eardrums. The second major change you'll notice is that the screen is more zoomed in. Now, there were certainly compromises porting this over to the handheld, and I can't really fault the game for these changes. It's still Ghosts and Goblins, and it feels like Ghosts and Goblins, and plays like Ghosts and Goblins, and is an admirable port. All the content seems to be here as far as I can tell. Now, I've never gotten very far in the NES or arcade versions of Ghosts and Goblins, so I'm not the person to ask when it comes to comparison. But I can tell you this version of the game is certainly the easiest. I've never had such an easier time killing Firebrand before. He just goes down like a puppet with his strings cut. There also doesn't seem to be as many enemies on the screen at once, which likely contributes to its overall easiness. This is also the only version of Ghosts and Goblins, or Ghouls and Ghosts for that matter, that I've seen with a password system, which I think is a welcomed addition because I am lazy and don't like having to redo stuff I've already done. There were some things in the game I found to be a bit off. During my playthrough of the game, I wasn't able to find any of the other weapons. The only ones I got were the lance, the shield, and the fire. I can't imagine the developers removed the other weapons from the game, and I assume that I must have missed the other weapons like the knife, but I never found them. Another thing that I found to be off in a very bad way were the platforms and the jumping. The jumping seems stiffer than the NES game and the arcade game. I feel like it's much harder to jump from a run than in the original. Platforms themselves feel like their programming doesn't extend to the end of the graphics. Just look at this. I'm not all the way at the end of the platform and I fall off. This happens almost every time, and I certainly don't remember this in the original. This was the primary way that I died during my playthrough. I would just die over and over because the length of the platform doesn't match the graphic. It really makes a lot of the jumps very hard, especially when you're drunk. Ghosts and Goblins on the Game Boy Color isn't the best version of the game, but it's Ghosts and Goblins on the go. It's got the opening cutscene and the English has been fixed, so it isn't such a laughable translation. I like this game. It's a fair to Midland port of a timeless classic. 1942 is yet another port of another Capcom game, and this one is also done by Digital Eclipse. What is 1942? It's a World War II shooter where you fly a plane perpetually into the top of the screen, shooting down anything that gets in your way. It's a genre that's classic, and 1942 on the Game Boy Color is a pretty good port. I never played the original arcade game, but I did play the NES port, and the one on the Game Boy Color is far superior. The graphics are much better, and like Ghosts and Goblins before it, this game doesn't seem as hard as its NES rendition. Granted, it was hard to play this game, what with the enemy using psychological warfare the whole time. Just listen to this music. It's horrible. It's possibly some of the worst music I have ever heard in a video game ever. Absolutely detrimental to one's personal health, and it loops through every single level. And it's strange that it is this bad because the music everywhere else in the game, menus, title screen, credits, and such, is pretty good. I'd say above average. So I don't know why the developers wanted to torture us with this auditory Iron Maiden, but they did, and I don't like it. When you start the game, you go from stage 32 to stage 1. It's a nice little countdown, and it makes me feel like I'm building towards something other than, say, leaving this small form of escapism and re-entering the reliable disappointment that is my life. The gameplay is simple. Fly forward and kill stuff. Not much more to it than that. You get 3 lives. If you die, you start from where you died, losing all of your power-up. If you get a game over, you start from the beginning of the level. There are several power-ups you can get in the game. One of them gives you 4 bullets to shoot instead of 2. Another gives you 2 wingmen to help you in your aerial killing spree. And this is certainly the best power-up in the game, as it gives you a wider range when you shoot. You just become a murder machine. Another power-up wipes every enemy off the screen. Another gives you an extra life, and yet another gives you an extra loop-de-loop. In addition to shooting, you also get this little loop-de-loop that allows you to dodge projectiles and enemies. You have a limited amount of these, and I never really found a use for them outside of the end of each level. The end of each level is effectively the hardest part of each level, as it should be. The screen is just so crowded with enemies and bullets, it's sometimes hard to reach the airplane carrier in time. And let me tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than dying right at the end of one of these levels. Towards the end of the game, the levels get harder and harder, and you're just flying through a storm of of shit that's trying to knock you out of the sky. You effectively have infinite lives, so a little endurance and persistence will get you through this game. It's certainly one of those games where if you play it long enough, you get into the zone and can just speed through the levels hypnotically. There are a variety of enemies. Green planes fly around trying to run into you. Orange planes come in from the side of the screen, and if you kill all of them, you get a power-up. There are also these little gray planes that fly onto screen, shoot a projectile at you, and then run away. These planes killed me a lot because the little bastards shoot these tiny red bullets that are hard to see, especially when you're drunk. Every once in a while, you'll fight a large plane that fills the screen and shoots various bullets at you. And these are more or less bosses, but they're not difficult to defeat at all. Really, it's just a matter of moving back and forth like an inch and dodging the bullets. There are also these other enemies that fly up from the bottom of the screen and run into you, killing you. And these deaths are incredibly cheap. So when you're playing, I don't recommend sitting at the bottom of the screen. It's best to float around the middle and keep moving. There isn't much to 1942, but what is there is fun, especially when you're drunk. This is the cheapest game in the list of rare Capcom games on Game Boy Color, but it's still about $50 in this year of our Lord 2020. So you may want to skip this in favor of something else. But if you like shmups, Game Boy, and Capcom, this is a game for you, my friends. And the last game on this list is the seminal classic Resident Evil Gaiden. Okay, it's not a classic, but it is a rare game by Capcom that I wish I had bought back in the day because a loose copy of the game now is worth about 100 George Washingtons. The first thing I have to say about this game is that the music is great. Whoever did the soundtrack did a really good job at it. Most of the music sounds like 8-bit renditions of synth music you might find in a 1980s John Carpenter movie. It's creepy and it fits the atmosphere and genre. In future installments of Resident Evil, they need to try out this type of music. Like, for reals, yo. It works really well. So Resident Evil Gaiden wasn't the first attempt at a handheld Resident Evil game. There was the game on the Gamecom from Tiger Electronic, and there was the attempt to port over the original Resident Evil from the PlayStation onto the handheld. Neither of these were successful, and in terms of the latter game, I'm really disappointed it never got made. Instead, we got Resident Evil Gaiden, or Gaiden if you prefer. A game that sort of came and went, and I don't really remember people talking about it too much back in the day, which is strange because despite its deviation from traditional Resident Evil gameplay at the time, it's surprisingly Resident Evil. The game's story is like most Resident Evil stories: zombie outbreak, lone character fighting against the odd, there's a big monstrous tyrant, and a child with some sort of significance to the story. Now, the story itself is delivered through cutscenes, and these cutscenes all look like someone's bad attempt at drawing like Robert Crumb. Now, the story goes like this. Barry works for an anti-BOW organization. He's been called in to investigate an incident on a cruise ship. Leon was sent in earlier, but hasn't reported back to HQ in 24 hours. Barry's job is to find Leon and the BOW and get back to base. Barry is helicoptered out to the cruise ship. He gets on board, goes inside, and finds the ship full of zombies. And thus, the quest begins. There's more to the story, but I'll come back to that. The gameplay is a top-down perspective. Barry searches the ship and fights zombies going to locations on the map that are highlighted in red, and picks up key items along the way to help him in his progress. These items are not visible on screen, so when you're near something that you can pick up, a tiny green exclamation point pops up in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. The exclamation point will be red when enemies are near. When you get near a door that you can open, this icon will be a green door with an arrow pointing in. If you can't open a door, this icon will be a red door with an X through it. This being a Resident Evil game, you spend most of your time searching one giant location. In this case, the cruise ship Starlight and all the rooms therein. Sometimes those rooms are locked and you need a special key or item to get in. Unfortunately, the rooms don't indicate which items are required for where. I didn't figure this out until halfway through the game and had to backtrack to get items I'd missed, which wouldn't have been bad except enemy layout changes with the accomplishment of each major objective, which is an unfortunate pain in the ass. Sadly, there are no puzzles in the game, and you don't get any files to read like diaries or reports. It would have helped change up the gameplay some, and the files would have added more layers to the story. Running around the boat, I couldn't help but be amused by the graphics and the way they depict the carnage on screen. This being a Resident Evil game, and like all Resident Evils, the environment has been destroyed in the pandemonium and corpses litter the area. It's sort of quaint to see 8-bit dead people laying around, and there are a lot of them everywhere, as well as some gore and the zombies. If I had played this game when I was 6 years old, I would have loved it. It sort of reminds me of games like Zombies Ain't My Neighbors or Splatterhouse. It's a horror game done in that sort of style, I guess you could say. I like it. I like it a lot. And that's just the top-down portion of the graphics. The game itself is actually very gory, mainly during combat and some of those other screens that show up in the game. The You've Died screen, the Continue screen, and the Save screen are just blood-spattered images. This can also be said of some of the cutscene images as well. The one that comes to mind off the top of my head is the cutscene when Barry first enters the ship and finds that it's full of zombies. Just look at these zombies. This is 8-bit horror goodness at its finest. During the combat, the zombies are all depicted in gory detail, and when you shoot them, they explode in blood. And when they hit you, there is a fair amount of blood as well. The combat in the game doesn't play out like in other Resident Evils. Instead of readying a weapon and shooting a gun, you go into these little RPG-esque fights. There's a bar at the bottom of the screen that represents your sights, and a little box that slides back and forth indicating your aim. Each enemy has a little hit indicator along the slider thingy, and you have to press A when the box is over it to land a shot. The size of the hit area depends on the distance of the enemy, and the speed at which the aim box slides depends on the weapon you're using. And you have to have your timing down well to make it through this. You do have access to your inventory during these fights and can change weapons and use health in real time. At first I hated these fights, but as time went by they kind of grew on me. However, I do wish we could have just had combat during the top-down portion of the game instead. Something along the lines of a top-down shooter or something. The only real benefit to this RPG type of fighting is that the zombies and gore can be depicted in detail, which again, they look great. Don't get me wrong, I really like the way that it looks. There are a limited number of weapons and enemies in the game. There are only 5 different types of zombies: a regular green male zombie, a regular female zombie, a female zombie that poisons people, a green crowbar carrying zombie, and a blue crowbar carrying zombie. All the zombies can only hit you if they are close up. The female zombies can poison you, and the blue crowbar zombies can hit you from a distance, which really blows, because through a lot of the later portions of the game, I had such little health that I would die in one hit, and those crowbar zombies can just hit me instantly as soon as they're on screen. Now, these are pretty much the only enemies in the game outside of the boss, the Tyrant. His fights play out the same as with the zombies, except in the later parts of the game, he can only be beaten if you push him backwards far enough, and you do this by shooting him, which really sucks, because this means that he'll eat up all your ammo in these boss fights. So your timing and your shooting and your aiming all have to be perfect so you're not just blowing through all your ammo. Your weapons are the standard RE fare: knife, handgun, shotgun, assault rifle, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, and a gas launcher, which I think is exclusive to this game. During combat, if you have another character with you, you can equip them with a weapon and armor, and they can help you during combat. Like all Resident Evils, the game involves item management, and I have to say, when you play this game, be conservative with health and ammo. It is scarce. I was going through the second half of this game with like no health whatsoever and hardly any ammo at all. It was freaking torture. I was dying constantly. Be conservative with health and ammo, for the love of God. Sometimes there are zombies that will be left over after combat, and either these zombies will have an item on them that you can pick up, like health or ammo, or sometimes they will still be alive. Or rather, they'll not be dead. And then you'll have to engage them in combat again. This game is fun, but not perfect. There are several things I don't like about it. One is the scarceness of health and ammo. There's a trick you can do towards the end of the game that will get you 99 bullets for the handgun. This involves dying again and again as ammo respawns in the engine room right before a fight with the Tyrant. However, for most of the game, you're going to be hurting for health. It's gonna suck. You're gonna hate it. Like, this game takes the phrase survival horror and really pushes it to the limit. Now, there are several types of health that heal a little damage to healing a lot of damage. However, for most of the game, you are going to be hurting for health. Hold on to as much health as you possibly can. Additionally, I don't like that only the name of the room you're in is indicated on the map. You'll get a key that says it's for door such and such, but you won't be able to see where that room is on the map because the game won't tell you that bit of information unless you're specifically in that room. Is bullshit. I hate it. It just means that you have to go from locked door to locked door until you find that specific room. Also, the locked doors won't give you any indication of what item you need to get in. So for me, I totally could have entered the ship's freezer in the beginning of the game, but the game didn't tell me to use the fuse on the door in the kitchen to do that. So yeah, I hate that. It pisses me the fudge off. Sometimes you'll have to kill a specific zombie to get a certain key item you'll need to progress in the game. These zombies are never indicated to be possessing an item, so that means that you just have to go around killing zombies until you find what you're looking for. This can be a drain on both health items and ammo, and I despise this. I despise this immensely. The game consistently refuses to give you necessary context to do things that you need to do to progress. And it's one of the fundamental things about this game that is very frustrating. Now, to engage an enemy in combat, the enemy can either walk up to you and grab you, and then you go into a fight, or you can engage your enemies preemptively in combat by pressing the B button, bringing up a targeting icon, and dragging it over to a zombie, and then releasing the B button to engage them in combat. This will allow you to get the jump on them and get a few easy shots in when combat starts. The thing I don't like about this is that when you target an enemy, you go into the combat system instead of, say, just shooting a bullet and not having this type of combat system at all. I'm really not overly fond of the combat. Another major problem with the game is the drop in frame rate. Now, I don't really care about drops in frame rate too much unless it's horribly egregious, and in Resident Evil Gaiden, it is like running through molasses. That is how slow the frame rate becomes. If there are more than a couple of sprites on screen, everything goes just right into slow motion. Resident Evil Gaiden is a fun game that certainly feels like Resident Evil, and you can get yourself lost in it. The story itself is serviceable and motivates the gameplay. The story, however, is not considered canon in the Resident Evil timeline, so if you don't play it, you won't be missing much. Although I do have to say that for a handheld Resident Evil, the story ain't bad. And with all that being said, let's go back to the story. It really is my favorite part. Like, seriously. Wake the kids. Barry enters the ship and finds that it's full of zombies. His mission is to get to the security room and use the cameras to find Leon. Barry gets there, and instead of finding Leon, he finds a girl on the sun deck. She is attacked by a monster. Barry goes to rescue her. He finds a giant tyrant with tentacles coming out of a vagina on its stomach. Barry defeats the monster, and it slinks away. The girl, Lucia, senses the monster is gone. Barry becomes suspicious of her. After this, headquarters calls in and tells Barry Leon is in the first class section of the ship. Lucia and Barry go there and are again attacked by the monster. Barry defeats it, but it snatches Lucia away. Barry searches the cabins and finds Leon. He brings up his suspicion about Lucia possibly being the BOW that he's supposed to neutralize and not the tyrant creature. Leon disagrees and tells Barry he's wrong. The two team up and go back to the security room to search the cameras for Lucia. They find her and the monster on the lower deck. Headquarters calls and informs them that the BOW they're looking for has green blood. Barry and Leon go to save Lucia. They fight the monster, they succeed, and the monster runs away. As it turns out, the monster has green blood. Barry's suspicions about Lucia are laid to rest. Suddenly, the ship explodes. Barry and Leon split up. Lucia goes with Leon, who the player now controls, and Barry goes off to do something completely unspecified by the character. Then some other stuff happens that I don't really remember because I was sort of drunk when I played this section of the game. Barry double crosses Leon and takes the girl and climbs aboard an Umbrella submarine. Umbrella agents fire on Leon, and then they vanish. Leon is left aboard the ship. Another explosion happens, and Leon goes to investigate the source. As it turns out, the monster is destroying the ship's engine room. Something. Barry is on board the Umbrella sub when he takes Lucia hostage and double crosses the Umbrella agents. This image of Barry holding a gun to a child's head is my favorite part of this whole game. After this, Barry steals the submarine and goes back to rescue Leon. Leon calls in a helicopter to get them out now that the storm is starting to clear. And the last thing we see is a small cut on Leon's neck and a little bit of green blood coming out. Dum dum dum! I love it. Makes no fucking sense at all. Hey, if you liked this video, check out my documentary, slash review on the original Silent Hill. Or check out this old review I did on Apocalypse for PS1. It's got a bunch of Bruce Willis quips in it. You'll like it.